On June 22nd, 2010, I walked out of prison after serving a total of 19 years. 7 of that was in solitary confinement. On the morning that I got prepared to re-enter society, they gathered a group of us into one room, allowed us to dress out into civilian clothes, as they call it. And as we were on our way out, they handed us a bag. In the bag was a sheet of paper that we had to sign saying we wouldn't carry a firearm. There were our medical records, and there were 3 condoms. I was like, these people are brilliant. But as I prepared to cross the threshold from captivity into freedom, one of the officers said, "I'll see you guys back in 6 months." When I first heard those words, I had a few choice words that I would have loved to have delivered, but the prospect of freedom and the stakes were too high. But I thought about what the officer said over and over and over again. And then it dawned on me that he wasn't being particularly mean-spirited. He was stating the facts. Nearly 70% of people who leave prison will return at some point. So he was playing the odds. But here's what actually happened. When I walked out of prison, I knew that I had a responsibility to the young men and women who was growing up in my neighborhood in Detroit. And so I immediately got out and I talked to people about schools I can go to and mentor. In the first school I went into, it stopped me in my tracks when I realized that it was in worse condition than any prison I've ever been in. Despite that, I discovered these amazing, brilliant students, and I was inspired to start an organization called Live in Peace, because I saw far too many Rest in Peace t-shirts in the hood. And it was a literary program where I was introducing kids to philosophy and theater and visual arts and literature at the highest level. And for that work, I won what was called the Black Male Engagement Leadership Award, even though they said I'll be back in prison in 6 months. Shortly after that, I was invited to an event hosted by the foundation that awarded us. And it was there that I met the director of MIT Media Lab, Joy Ito. Now, at the time, I didn't make the connection between MIT Media Lab and MIT, so I didn't know who this little, cool, little, cuddly little Japanese guy was. But it turns out Joy was a very forward-thinking person. And we started talking about how do we use technology and innovation to solve problems in a city that was suffering at the time. And he welcomed me to join him on what we turned out to be called a hackathon. Now, I was just getting out the joint, so when I heard hackathon, it's like, I don't know how this is going to go. Later on in 2012, Joy invited me to be a part of what's called MIT Directors Fellows. Now, y'all got to imagine this shit. I was gone for 2 decades, and now I'm at MIT Media Lab, where they got all these fancy robots, bionics, cars that fold up, and so it's literally like Fred Flintstone stepping into an episode of the Jetsons. But I was excited to be there. And what I was more excited to do was to discover that despite where I came from, I was able to add value based on the way that I thought and solved problems. But they said I would be back in prison in 6 months. While I was at MIT Media Lab, I started a project called the Atonement Project, where I used a cross-section of visual and written art to facilitate restorative justice conversations. And I was nominated for a global TED Prize. It's $1 million prize that happens every year. And I actually came down to being one of 20 finalists. And it's very apparent that I didn't win, because I probably wouldn't be here right now. I mean, I think y'all are cool and y'all look amazing. But come on, though, if they'd have gave me $1 million fresh out the joint. I took the Atonement Project and began to teach a class at the University of Michigan, where I taught for 3 semesters. I don't have an associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, PhD. I just showed up with a GED, open heart, and fly kicks, as y'all can see. That's how I get on, from Detroit. But they said I would be back in prison in 6 months. In 2013, I became part of a cohort of leaders as part of the Kellogg Foundation's leadership fellowship. They said I'd be back in prison in 6 months. In 2014, I delivered a talk at TED's 30th anniversary to a standing ovation, even though they said I would be back in prison in 6 months. The interesting thing about that talk is it was the first year that TED had moved the conference from California to Vancouver. And because I had a felony, I wasn't allowed to attend in person. Later on in 2015, I won Manchester University Innovator of the Year Award, even though they said I'd be back in prison in 6 months. In 2015, my life got a little bit interesting. I got this phone call. I was walking in the house, and I saw the phone ring, and it said, unknown number. Now, at the time, I was a budding entrepreneur, so I answered all calls. Now I owe a few people, so if I don't know that number, I'm hanging up. But I answered the phone. This woman said, hey, Shaka, how's your schedule looking toward the end of June? And I was like, well, so far it looks pretty flexible. And then she hung up on me. I was like, wow, that was strange. Next day I come in, same call, same unknown number, and I answer the phone. And she said, hey, Shaka, this is Andrea. And I am so sorry that I hung up on you yesterday. My kids were running amok. I got sidetracked, and I needed to handle that. But I was calling because I wanted to know if you would be available, because Oprah Winfrey would love to interview you in Hawaii at her home. And I was like, well, Andrea, let me check my schedule. Might fit Oprah up in here somewhere. So I accommodate Oprah's requests, because that's just the type of gentleman I am. And so I go and I do this interview with Oprah that was supposed to be in 45 minutes. It turned into a 3.5-hour conversation, which she later went on to write that it was not only one of the best conversations she's had in her career, it was one of the best interviews she's ever done in her life. And then Oprah texts me one day, because, you know, Oprah be texting me. It's just who I am, just letting y'all know who I am. And she said out of 37,500 interviews, it was one of the best. It was in her top 5, actually. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. March 8th, 2016, 26 years after the day I was shot standing on the corner on my block in Detroit, my memoir, Righting My Wrongs, debuted on the New York Times bestseller list, even though they said I'd be back in prison in 6 months. Thank you. Now, if that wasn't interesting enough, fast forward to February 2017. I was headed up to Silicon Valley because a friend offered to host a release party for the paperback version of my book. And so I looked through my Rolodex and just started hitting all my friends up. Hey, got this thing coming up. If you're up there, check it out. And I hit one of my friends up in particular who I really wanted to be there because he's such an incredible, inspirational person in my life. His name is Ben Horowitz. And I hit Ben up and I said, Ben, I got this thing going. And he responds like, oh man, that's kind of jacked up because I'm having dinner with President Obama during the same time that your event is happening. I was like, damn. President gonna take my shine. But I was like, it's understandable. I'm a friend. Hey, it's President Obama. How could I hate on that? But he said, but here's what I'm gonna do. I'm going to tell President Obama that I'm coming to your event. I'm going to give him a rain check. And I was like, damn, yo, this is crazy. And so he did. He came to my event. And the following day, he was like, I got to stop by and I just want to go meet with Valerie Jarrett and pay my respects and let her know we'll rearrange the dinner with the president. And I was like, cool. And he was like, just roll with me. So we riding. And I'm doing like phone interviews because I'm on book tour and I'm hustling and all this thing. And while I'm sitting in the car waiting on him to go handle his business, his driver's like, yo, check your message. I'm like, hold on, bro. I'm talking on the phone. I'm trying to. He's like, no, it's like urgent. And so I checked my text, and Ben's wife, who's also my amazing friend Felicia, is like, yo, come inside. I need you to come, hurry up and come inside. So I walk in, and she was like, President Obama wants to meet you. I was like, you interrupted? No. And I was like, wow, this is crazy, right? And so I walk in, and President Obama's standing there, and he's like, so I heard you got a book. Like, well, he's like, well, Mr. President, I do have a book. And he was, so the president can't get a book? Now listen, y'all, I'm from Detroit, where I hustle hard, and I always have books on me. And of all the days I don't have a book on me. So I'm like, yo, Prez, you can't get a book, but you can log on right now and order because I'm sure you got some cash. But they said I would be back in prison in 6 months. In 2018, I took on this position as executive director of the Anti-Recidivism Coalition, largely because I think it's important for people who've been impacted by system to lead the charge when it comes to changing those systems. Thank you. And then just a few months ago, I got an opportunity to open up at President Obama's My Brother's Keeper event. And guess who had that book? But why do I share all this? Why is this important? Is it to brag? Well, a little bit, I think we need to celebrate ourselves more. But I share this extraordinary story of overcoming obstacles, overcoming adversity, overcoming all of the impediments that stands in the way of people reimagining a life for themselves beyond prison bars. I share this story because there's an opportunity here right in this room for us to reimagine how we see and how we think of people. Our brilliant last speaker just talked about the waste that we contribute to the world and the impact it has on the quality of life. But there's another type of waste that we don't talk about enough, and it's the waste of human potential. I'm one of the fortunate ones. When I went to prison, I was actually literate. I also met some of the most incredible mentors you can imagine. These weren't people like you guys in the room who had accomplished a lot and been through some amazing things. These are men who are dying in prison right now. But they saw something redeemable in me. Excuse me. And they gave me books. And those books challenged me to think. And my thinking challenged me to grow. And my growth challenged me to do. And so what I'm challenging you to do today is to think differently about those who are currently being judged on their absolute worst moment. Most of us in this room would not want to be judged on our worst hair day. Some of y'all might hit that bathroom. But those are the facts. None of us would want to be held hostage to a moment of vulnerability, a moment of poor thinking, a moment of just being in proximity to somebody else who's in their worst moment. But this is what we do to human beings. We currently have over 2 million men and women who are incarcerated. And I can tell you that I'm not an exception to the rule because I've met some of the most brilliant thinkers, strategists, innovators, writers, speakers, singers, husbands, fathers, sons, grandsons, people who are walking out of prison and having doors of opportunity closed in their face based on one moment in their life. We can't create the world that we want if we're unwilling to give people second chances. We can't create the world that we say that we envision if we're unwilling to acknowledge our own biases that doesn't allow us to see poor black, brown, and poor white people as our equals in terms of our humanity. So my challenge today, if you have a company, remove the barriers to employment. If you own property, remove the barriers that allow people to live somewhere. If you have an opportunity, please extend it to somebody who's in desperate need of it. I do these talks all the time, and we all get in our feelings and emotions of the moment, but then there's not a lot of follow-through. Hire people to speak on their own behalf. If you're in the entertainment industry and you're talking about issues that are impacting people, employ those people to tell those stories. If you're funding something in the community, utilize the people in those communities. I think it's one of the greatest gifts we can give to the world, and I think it's the greatest way that we can undo some of the wastefulness that we've created when it comes to human potential. Thank you all for such a wonderful experience. Appreciate y'all. Thank y'all. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate y'all. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate y'all. Thank y'all.